Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
Sad news this week that the Cambridge Festival is closing. It's one of the oldest folk festivals in the country, and it would have been its 60th anniversary. But last year, apparently, it made a loss of 320,000. And it made me think, lots of things. Firstly, what's happening to festivals? Last year, again, an announcement that 60 festivals had been postponed or cancelled or completely shuttered in 1 year. And another 132 festivals have fallen by the wayside since the pandemic. So this is really, it's extraordinary. You think, well, okay, so there's simply not enough money in the market. And, a Glastonbury ticket costs £373.50 or whatever, which I have to say is a fantastically good deal for a week's entertainment. But then you look at, Dave, what's happening in terms of stadium tours. It's just, didn't you look at what was happening in Twickenham and stuff?
Well, the first thing, my understanding of reading the thing about the Cambridge Folk Festival, they are saying that they're taking a year off and they will be back. I'll believe it when I see it.
Oh, right. Well, you hope so. It tends to be what people say when they just can't quite brace themselves to admit that things are over.
I think that the part of the difficulty with Cambridge, I'm maybe wrong with this, but I think it's run by the local council. So it's not a standard commercial enterprise, although it's obviously been there for a long, long time.
Yeah.
I think I've only been once. It's very kind of, it's very quaint by contemporary festival standards. It used to take place in the grounds. Was it Cherry Hinton Hall?
Yeah, and quite small, actually. That's right.
Yeah, quite a small thing, and it was people in tents listening to Bert Jansch, and then what happens is these things get bigger, don't they? They always think, well, if I click it up a gear, we can get we get Nancy Griffith, or we can get, I don't know who it is, and so the prices just generally start climbing. And I think it's probably very difficult to keep control of that when that happens. And I think they've also been affected by the fact that it wasn't Latitude the same
day. They moved it back, isn't that right? To the same, and I think there probably is quite a bit of crossover there. Yeah.
And Latitude's obviously in the same east of England, so it will be it will be touching a lot of the same market. Now, it's funny you should say this, because I read a story this week about the Rugby Football Union, who run the game in Britain, threatening that they're going to move Twickenham headquarters. They're going to move it to somewhere like Milton Keynes. And the reason for this is that because of agreements with the local council and local residents, they can only have a certain number of events in a year. And there's probably a restriction on the number of loud, concerts. And of course, everybody wants to be in big concerts nowadays. And they're unable to compete with places like the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which opened, it's about 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
And that is now making big strides into the concert market. And so I started looking at what's happening in the UK this summer. And here we are.
It's astonishing, isn't it?
It's just astonishing. Now, obviously, Oasis, 19 open-air shows.
I worked out that that's roughly £280 million worth of tickets. That's at a reasonable price, actually. So what people pay will be considerably more, but that's what it's taken out of the market.
Well, that's just the tickets. Because the tickets are only a fraction of what people spend on.
Oh, yeah, you've got to get there and then you've got to buy all the merch.
They buy the merch. They
You've got to
buy
stay in a
food.
hotel, probably.
Well, absolutely. A lot huge number of people will too. Because that's the thing you realize nowadays with, it's kind of like football. You get a major Premier League games,
Yeah.
And people have come from overseas, or they've come 200 miles across the country or whatever. It's a special treat. So anyway, going back to 2025 UK summer, Oasis, a mere 19 open air shows. Beyonce, 6 shows at Tottenham Hotspur. 6.
How big is Tottenham Hotspur?
Well, it takes 64,000 for a game of football, so it won't be as many as that, but let's say 50 or something like that. 6 shows. Coldplay, 6 Wembleys and 2 Hampden Parks. So now Coldplay touring the UK means we play 6 shows in London and we play 2 shows in Glasgow. That's your lot, really.
That's the UK covered.
That's the UK covered. And I
We're
suppose
not going anywhere. You come to us.
Well, and obviously people are quite happy to do that.
Yeah.
Of Olivia Rodrigo, 1 Hyde Park and 2 giant Co-op Live, new venue in Manchester. Sam Fender, I was intrigued by this. 1 London Stadium, the former Olympic Stadium, now West Ham, and 3 St. James's Park in Newcastle. 3, because obviously that's his heartland. Sabrina Carpenter, 2 Hyde Parks. Now here we get to the acts I've barely heard of, okay? Imagine Dragons are playing 2 Tottenham Hotspur stadiums.
How did that happen? Where did that come from?
Catfish and the Bottlemen are playing 2 Tottenhams and 1 Principality, the Welsh rugby stadium.
And Heaton Park.
And Heaton Park in Manchester.
Yeah.
Post Malone is doing 1 Tottenham. The Stray Kids, you've never heard of the Stray Kids, have you, Mark?
No.
Be honest, they're a K-pop phenomenon. They're doing the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium 2 nights.
It's
absolutely extraordinary.
It's 130,000 people paying 100. I cannot believe it.
Kendrick Lamar, 2 Tottenhams, 1 Principality in Cardiff, 1 Villa Park, and 1 Hampden Park. So Kendrick Lamar is covering Britain more than Coldplay.
Yeah.
More than homegrown Coldplay, it would seem. I just think it's absolutely astonishing. And, and those are just the one-off stadium gigs. But then there's the big, as you said, Glastonbury, BST, Hyde Park, British Summer.
Well, there's the people who are touring. The Springsteen is touring. Alanis Morissette, Ollie Mars, Justin Timberlake, Kylie, Robbie Williams, Neil Young. I mean, it is the opportunities to go out and just pour a vast amount of cash into somebody's pocket are enormous, which is great. But it's still
it's not hell. It's not. Well, it's great to a certain extent, but it's not helping the market at all, is it? You know what I mean? Because the more people are spending on 19 Oasis shows and loads of the other ones, the less they're spending on anything else.
Yeah.
So this doesn't help the middling act, does it? Not at all. It just takes huge amounts of money out of the market, And,
but also makes you think there must be a festival goer is a different species of person. I think they have a different attitude to spending money. And I think you can understand that there is some real attraction for not missing out on the big event. And the big event is something happening in a giant stadium and you're there and it's an Instagrammable experience that you don't want to miss out on. And that's probably more of a kind of supercharged moment that you're going to kind of, aim all your cash towards than spending 3 or 4 days on a campsite in Dorset, mooching about and going to see the odd band and having an ice cream. I don't know. But it's just interesting. There's a pattern emerged there, isn't there?
But also, presumably, going back to what you were saying earlier, that loads of festivals have gone out of business since COVID. A lot of these will be festivals that grew up in the last 10 years, weren't they?
Yeah.
Because what seemed to me to happen, is that everywhere you went in the UK, there was some kind of festival. There was a stately home somewhere that had something, or there was a local council.
There was a little race course.
Or there was some,
an elephant fair.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they're just...
a candy stripe marquee and a couple of folk bands and almost like a kind of like a village fete, really, really nice.
Well, yeah, it could be that village fates have been rather put in the shade by these things, and they're all after the same suppliers, aren't they? They're all after the same portaloos. They're all after the same car park attendants. They all need huge infrastructure, and so the price of that infrastructure goes up.
That's what this piece that I was reading saying, that the cost for promoters has gone up by 40%. 40% more in 2 years just put on a festival. And also most of those suppliers you're talking about insist on being paid up front, which is kind of understandable, because you think they would, if you've been burnt once by, putting up a load of tents which you never got paid for, you think, I'm never going to let that happen again.
Definitely.
So in order to put on a festival, you can't just chance it. You've got to have enough security to know that you could pay for it first, and then get your money back.
Anyway, speaking of Glastonbury, I couldn't let this go without noting that the Searchers have announced that they're playing the last ever gig at this year's Glastonbury. Now, the Searchers, Liverpool group, contemporaries of the Beatles, had some very big hits.
They were fantastic. I love the Searchers.
Needles and Pins, When You Walk in the Room, all that kind of stuff.
Don't Throw Your Love Away, was that?
Don't Throw Your Love Away.
Yeah.
Goodbye, My Love. Sweets from My Sweet. I've just said that, haven't I? Sugar and Spice, all that stuff. And they formed in Liverpool in, I think, 1958.
God, no.
And so the story I was reading was kind of saying, unless you know to the contrary, they are the longest running band of all time.
How many Searchers are the originals then?
Well, I think there's two who were in and around, and I wouldn't. But
that's pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah, they were there when they were happening in 1963.
So not far off 70 years.
Absolutely, yeah. So yes, these guys.
Trying to work it out. 67 years. That is. It's amazing.
They're well into their 80s, and they said in the interview I was reading that they still love playing, but the traveling gets a bit much for them. And I can well sympathize with that. They say, of course, when we started, there were no motorways, which is true. They would have been, when the Searchers were going to play down in London, 1963. Well, there's no M1 or anything like that, It was the A1, and you made your way down as best you could,
Well, like all those stories about the Beatles and the van with the broken window, coming back 400 miles in kind of early January. Fantastic.
Yeah.
What suffering.
Yeah. So there they go. The Searchers. If you're going to Glastonbury this year, make sure to go and see the Searchers, because they have been, that whole jingle jangle sound dates back to the Searchers before the Byrds, really,
Yeah.
And so that whole kind of jingle jangle thing that has gone right through REM and into millions of groups subsequently, it goes back to the Searchers, 12-string Rickenbackers and all that kind of thing. And so you'll be hearing it for the last time if you're at Glastonbury in 2025. The Searchers. Are they the longest running band of all time? Do you know better?
The Word Podcast. Prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
I noticed this week that the controversy about Joni Mitchell and blackface has kind of resurfaced, and it's a big social media thing, and it's a really complicated story. It's a really interesting one, I think. In 1976, she said in an interview that she was going to a Halloween party, and she'd, after seeing a black man in the street, she said, I saw this guy, this beautiful spirit walking towards me with a bop. She said, and as he went past her, he turned around and said, looking good, sister, looking good. And I just felt so good after that. And I felt this spirit went into me. So she'd bought a kind of wig and some sideburns and a moustache, and she'd made herself up in blackface to go to this party, you know. And after that, she developed an alter ego character that she called Art Nouveau, and it features, of course, controversy on the cover of Don Juan's Reckless Daughter. And she revisited that character in several times, you know, in a short film called The Black Cat in the Black Mouse Socks that she did, I think, in 1982. And she'd said to LA Weekly, she said, I don't have the soul of a white woman. I write like a black poet. I frequently write from a black perspective. When I see black men sitting there, I tend to have a tendency to nod like I'm a brother. I really feel an affinity because I've experienced being a black guy on several occasions. And I know this sounds kind of extraordinary, but you know that's what she did. And what the whole controversy about blackface is it's lampooning and it's belittling and it's commercially, you know, using the values of black culture, and it's absolutely shameful. But what she was always trying to get across was her solidarity with the black community. If you look at her website over the years, she's always posted her favorite records. Her favorite records, this hasn't changed for ages, always were Claire de Lune by Debussy, Subtle Lament by Duke Ellington, Solitude by Billie Holiday, Jeep's Blues by Duke Ellington, Saturday Night Fish Fry, Louis Jordan, Johnny Be Good by Chuck Berry, and then Third World Man by Steely Dan. Those are her favourite records. She produced the Mingus album with Charlie Mingus, didn't she? With you know, with Herbie Hancock and with Wayne Shorter. I mean, nobody has been more evangelical.
I mean, it's just. The fact that there's a to-do about it now just underlines the fact that we have, a permanent appetite for fake indignation about things nowadays.
Yeah,
that's how people prove that they're alive, by getting cross about things. You know what I mean? It's like a load of people who discovered Joni Mitchell in the last 10 years. Suddenly coming to terms with the fact that Joni Mitchell has always been a loose cannon of all kinds. That's part of her appeal, for goodness sake. She doesn't do the predictable thing.
No, if she'd done the predictable thing, she would have carried on making records like Blue for years. Well, she didn't. She went off and played jazz records, and actually a lot of the time, a lot of people just didn't want.
Yeah. So, you know, and I was just looking at my copy of Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, and I remember when this came out, and I don't remember anybody remarking on how strange it was that she appears in blackface on the cover and also appears kind of as herself.
But it was 50 years ago. You know, that's the thing. Nobody
said anything about it at all.
But they've reissued that cover now. There's a new
and they've done it with a different cover.
Picture of Joni Mitchell's face inside the open mouth of a wolf. And they make it clear to say the wolf had been brought in from a sanctuary for the photo session. So they've taken every step to make sure that what they've done to replace it is acceptable. Well, it's a really difficult situation. Obviously, it's a shame, real shame it happened. But I have some real sympathy for what she meant at the time.
Let me just tell you, the whole subject of blackface, there are some brilliant books about the whole subject of blackface, and it's way more complicated.
Yeah.
There's a fantastic book called Where Dead Voices Gather, written by Nick Tosches. I think it's about Burt Williams. It's just, it's a whole world, that is, which dominated American entertainment, and not just American entertainment, for 50 years. It was just absolutely astonishing. I tell you what, I've also just noticed on the back cover of Don Juan's Reckless Daughter, so you got her blackface on the front. On the back, there's a little picture of Joni Mitchell, obviously taken when she's about, 9 or 10 years old or something. And she's wearing what appears to be a kind of a Native Canadian blanket, and she's banging a little, native drum, and the speech bubble above her says, "How?" So there you go.
Hashtag different times.
Hashtag different times. Joni Mitchell, God bless her. What is she? In her 80s and still causing controversy. Still giving people
stirring it up.
Yeah, that's what I like to see. I had an interesting encounter with a record this week, Mark. You know, I loosely very often say, you know, I've had this record for years and years and years, and I don't think I've ever played it. I think there was a case this week where it was genuinely true. And I tell you what it was. Because the sun was shining the other day, it illuminated parts of my record collection, which are normally in shade. And so you can see the spines of things. You think,
it's wonderful. It's like Stonehenge. Certain times of year, the beam of light will pick out whatever it's just picked out. Tell me what it was.
And it picked out this record, and I pulled it out. And I thought, do you know, I don't think I've ever played that record. And here I'm holding it up on Zoom for Mark to see. It was the third release on Brian Eno's ambient label.
Oh, right, okay.
Or Editions EG, as I think it was called at the time. It was 1979, and this was called Ambient 3, Day of Radiance, and the artist was Laraaji, Laraaji. And I looked at this and thought, I don't think I've ever played that. And I looked inside, and of course, what did I find inside, Mark?
Press release.
A press release.
From an old pal of ours, I'm sure.
It wasn't, because it's not actually signed by anybody, but it's so long ago. It's from Polydor, who were the distributors at the time.
Does it start? Good news, the debut long player by Laraaji is upon us.
Laraaji is a composer and performer of electronic mode zither music. And this is from the press office in Stratford Place, London W1. And the telephone number, and this is wonderful, you know, time travel. The telephone number is 01. It's not 0171, or, you know what I mean? It was before London had a division in its telephone codes. Do you remember that?
Yeah. Whenever for London, there was a slogan.
Everybody in London was 01. So this is 1979. Now it's possible, if I go back and look at the actual date, it's possible that this came out when James Callaghan was the Prime Minister of the UK.
Oh my God.
Okay. And I looked at this record and I played it, and it's fabulous. It's absolutely uplifting and fabulous. And it's as if I've put it away for 45 years, and that's helped. It's like laying down wine. You know what I mean? You introduce it into the open air in the year 2025.
And it exhales.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something magical happens. And I thought, who's this guy? And so I look on Wikipedia, and Laraaji is an American kind of former comedian who became a musician called Edward Larry Gordon is his full name. He can't still be with us, can he? Oh, yes. He's about to be 82, okay? He's still making records. And here I'm returning to a theme that we've touched upon in podcasts in the past. You can find 32 of his albums on Spotify. 32. If you discover him late in his career, late in life, it's there. Now, that never would have been the case 30 years ago. You would have just disappeared without trace. Nobody disappears.
So you're going to settle down this afternoon and start working your way through the remaining 31 albums of Laraaji's catalogue.
I don't think I'll do that. I think I'll go back and actually play Ambient 3.
Isn't that lovely, though, to find something you've never played and discover that it's that good?
Oh, it's fabulous.
The record that I replayed this week, very briefly, was one that I can really remember. This was in March 1985. We were clearing smash hits at the printers, and the designer at the time was a girl called Vicky McDonald, who was absolutely terrific. Really lovely girl and really, really talented designer. She had a little cassette machine, and she had two little speakers, little stereo speakers. She set up. We were sitting there correcting the proofs, and she pressed the button, and on came "You Spin Me Round Like a Record" by Dead or Alive. And at the end of that first track, it was a compilation tape she made. The end of that track, we went to see what the next one was going to be, and it was "You Spin Me Round," brackets like a record, close brackets, by Dead or Alive. Again, and the third time, I've always said, "Is there anything else on this tape?" She said, "No, I love this record so much. What I've done is I've got a whatever it was, a C60, I think, and I've just dubbed it on again and again and again. I like it." And we all started to listen to it, and we realised it was completely hypnotic. I really remember this moment, and we spent all morning listening to this one song, and it got better and better and better. I mean, it was a great record. I can remember thinking at the time, I've never really heard anything like it. Actually, we'd heard, we heard sort of, the Divine record. It was by Stock Aitken and Waterman, and You Think You're a Man by Divine, and Whatever I Do, Wherever I Go by Hazel Dean. And also linked back to, do you remember Donna Summer? And I Feel Love with Giorgio Moroder. I think those were the first kind of high energy records.
I'll tell you what it is. It's the point of, it's a really interesting thing, this, because, the great dance records of the 60s were not expected to go on a long time. They were kind of explosions.
Yeah.
They lasted 3 minutes, and they were little dramas, and everybody knew how the drama went. Once you get into automated rhythm, you're producing things that are longer, and the point is to be hypnotic.
Yeah, completely.
The point is to make you want more of that, not something different. You can't turn away from, I Feel Love by Donna Summer and play The Jam. You can't do it. You know what I mean?
You're in a completely different space, aren't you? You want that to continue.
And I'll tell you
which is a dance music thing.
One of the things that I remember, one of the records that I remember having this kind of watershed effect is George McRae's Rock Your Baby.
Oh, yeah.
And I was working in a record shop when that came out. And of course, that was that kind of click track percussion, wasn't it? That was the appeal of it. And when the album came out, if I'm remembering correctly, I think most of the first side was that song.
It was
just done longer. That was kind of the appeal. So, nobody would have made a tape and put one T-Rex record on again and again and again. But
not remotely, or a record by the Damned or something. No, the whole idea was meant to be just continuous, and you were just in this particular groove, But I thought that high energy, I just got really fond memories of that. I don't know how you describe it, really. It's got that very slightly frantic, machine-driven, percussive sound, and very top-heavy. Very kind of, very nervy and a very trebly sound. And you got it on Sylvester, You Make Me Feel Rock.
Oh, God,
the Weather Girls, It's Raining Men, and maybe Small Town Boy by Bronski Beat, all of which was at the same time, actually. That was just a certain kind of frantic, slightly panicky sound.
Yeah.
It was very attractive. And I just thought, Dead or Alive, I mean, that was a great record. I've got fond memories of those times.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
So earlier this week, I was at a screening of The Immediate Family, the film that we talked about the people who played backup on all kinds of famous records, James Taylor, Carole King, Warren Zevon, all kinds of people. And the special guest who I interviewed was Leland Sklar, the memorably named and even more memorably
generously bearded,
the winner of the bass player who most looks like an Old Testament prophet competition many years running, bass hero who most looks like Ian McKellen in a Lord of the Rings film. That's Leland Sklar, the man who does say his top lip has not been visible since 1969 or something like that. So he's a very distinctive figure. He's now, whatever he is, he's 78 years old or something.
Yeah.
But he was fantastic. He was so interesting to talk to. And his enthusiasm so undimmed. How many records have you played on, Leland? I went and looked on Wikipedia, the Too Many's account. I think he said something like 21,000 or something.
You're kidding me.
Absolutely.
21,000 records.
And
that's Carole King's It's Too Late. It's You've Got a Friend, James Taylor, isn't it?
It's just a million. Phil
Carrie,
Collins
Joni
records. And Joni Mitchell records, all kinds of things. And loads of things that have been totally forgotten, probably, alongside them. He plays on Billy Cobham's Spectrum. All kinds of stuff. And I wasn't surprised to learn that he'd done that many when he told me how he still worked nowadays. So like I say, 78. I said, well, don't you want to give up? I said, oh, no. It's just, I just want the phone to ring. I just want people to come and get me to play. And
absolutely, because if they don't come and get you to play, you're kind of unemployed, aren't you? I mean, that's what you do, for God's sake.
And he was over here not long ago playing bass with Lyle Lovett, who he's recorded with and performed with over the years. And he says, when I'm on tour, which I am whenever I get an opportunity, because he loves touring, which is strange, Yeah. You thought he'd be bored with it and not. And he says, but in between the shows, I go to my room and there will be emails sending me parts to sending me tracks to overdub bass onto. So he goes and sits in his hotel room.
That's incredible, isn't it?
And plays bass on tunes being put together by.
So by the time he gets back on stage, he's earned another X $1,000. Good man! What a brilliant work ethic.
Absolutely extraordinary work ethic, and has not lost any of his appetite for the work or his zest for it. So I said, and in the film, James Taylor at the beginning and James Brown at the end, both say, well, if it wasn't for these guys, these records wouldn't be anything like what they are. And I said, well, they say that, but you don't participate in the writing royalty and so forth. He says, no, you don't. He says, because you don't get invited back if you.
No, that's right. If you ask for points, it goes a bit quiet, doesn't it?
It goes a bit quiet.
But didn't somebody give him points?
He said, I've only had points once in my life, and this is a guy who played 20,000 records, whatever it is, once on a Phil Collins live album. And I didn't ask for them. They donated them, whatever percentage it was. And it was very nice they did it. But I didn't ask at all. But it's just...
I've just put 21,000 into my calculator and divided it by the 60 years he would have been recording. Do you know how many records that is a year?
Go on.
350. So he's pretty much making one record, which is fair enough, because if you did a session, you could probably do three or four tracks in one go, Well, and clearly if you're banging out 3 or 4 tracks before you go on stage in the evening from your hotel room, you can clock them up.
Yeah. It's
incredible.
Extraordinary guy, to meet. Quite inspiring, really.
Really inspiring.
So what else have we been doing this week? We talked to Kate Mossman about her book about meeting and interviewing elderly rock stars.
Which is very good.
It's really very good.
There was some moments in that conversation which were extraordinary. One of which I think was she says, Kevin Ayres drank a pint of Pernod and then drove me down a mountain. Listener, you'll have to get hold of her book and find out what happened. It's a really good story, I think.
And now's as good a time as any to remind you that if you haven't already become a Patreon supporter, it's not too late, listeners. It's really not too late. If you go to patreon.com/word in your ear, you can find out how you could be involved as a patron and help keep this show on the road. The road it's been on since 2007, allow me to remind you. And you could be joining...
look out the searchers. We've done 17 years now.
There you go. Look out the searchers. And you might be joining us on the occasion of your birthday to throw a log on the Word in Your Ear fire, as was the case just recently with our old pal, Avi Chowdhury.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And we are joined by a birthday guest who has a conversational log to throw on the fire. One of the best we think we've ever been offered. And Avi Chowdhury, it's lovely to see you. What we're going to do is you're going to tell us your query, and we're going to you're going to go first with your examples. I'm going to go with mine, but Dave Hepworth knows the answer. So Dave's going to go last.
Start with the question.
Give us the question.
So the question is, who is the most unlikely looking person to become a rock star?
Brilliant.
And
Okay.
it's prompted by having seen a picture of the late Nobby Stiles, who is possibly the most unlikely looking person to become a World Cup winning footballer.
Absolutely.
But there are two that sprung to mind for me. One, I don't want it to sound as though I'm sort of taking the mickey out of him, because a lot of people do take the mickey out of him. I actually quite like him in many ways. Is I'm afraid Phil Collins.
All right.
Who sort of, was hugely successful, wasn't he, in the early 80s, whilst looking like, I don't know,
a cab driver. A cab driver.
Yeah. A cab driver. Yes.
He played Buster. When he played Buster Edwards, he was perfect.
He was.
He could have been running a florist outside Waterloo Station. No difficulty at all. That's a good one.
Yeah. And the other one, who I think started off not looking really unlikely, and then took pretty major steps to make sure he looked completely like a rock star, would be Elton John.
Okay.
He was this kind of pudgy-looking fellow, wasn't he?
Reg
from Pinner.
But became charismatic. Actually, Phil Collins looked really good in the early days, when he's in his dungarees with his long hair. It's like, I'm going to give you...
He had a beard at one stage, I think.
Yes, he did, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to chip in and say that I think there are people who've made a virtue of their ordinariness. And they are Buddy Holly, Roy Orbison, Mike Mills of R.E.M., the Proclaimers, and Tiny Tim. There are people who turned their oddness into something charismatic. And by that I mean Shane MacGowan, Joey Ramone, Gene Simmons, and Paul Stanley.
Very good.
There are people who are conventional but have never quite seemed charismatic, and that would be Ed Sheeran, who always looks to me as though he's off on his way to student quiz night in the JCR. But I think this is unkind because he's not the leader of the group. But I always think, and we're getting back to cab drivers again, but I think the least charismatic looking rock star ever was, or still is actually, Paul Bonehead Arthurs of Oasis. Because Bonehead used to really look like your minicabs here. He'd be there with these terrible car coats and these absolutely awful sweaters. And I just had a quick look to see what he looks like now, because he's going on the road with Oasis.
Yeah.
And he looks now, he's completely changed. He's got a goatee, fabulous pair of John Lennon granny glasses, really cool clothes. He looks fantastic.
He's probably got a personal trainer and a nutritionist now. He's why no footballers nowadays look like Nobby Stiles, because they're all too well looked after nowadays. They're like thoroughbred racehorses.
Yeah.
And we haven't mentioned Van Morrison. I just throw that in there because
that's true. Van Morrison,
because there's the apocryphal story of some sort of rock festival somewhere where all the performers were gathered in the big house afterwards, carousing and enjoying themselves. Jimmy Page and all the usual people. And then Van Morrison rings the back doorbell and somebody goes to the door and says, "Did anybody order a minicab?" Because he looks
something like Gavin and Stacey. Anybody order a Chinese?
Okay, those are all excellent suggestions, but I'm quite relieved that you haven't picked my solution, because I know the answer.
Have you got one answer?
Of course you do.
Who is the most unlikely looking rock superstar ever?
Oh, you're going to have to give us some clues, see if we can guess.
Yeah.
What decade are we talking about?
No longer with us, right. But absolutely revered. And we're coming up to a very significant anniversary this year of where this individual's reverence was the affection he enjoyed was recognized on a national scale, and he moved to a completely different level as superstardom, despite having the oddest physiognomy that you can possibly imagine.
Must be Live Aid.
And that person is, you're in the right event. You're in the right event.
Was it America or England?
Oh, come on. It's Live Aid. Who was the big star of Live Aid? Who does everybody remember?
Freddie Mercury.
Freddie Mercury.
Right.
Come on. Freddie Mercury, from being a youngster, was like, well, yeah, if you'd said to Freddie Mercury in his class back in Zanzibar, wasn't it? That he was
that's true. When you see
Freddie
people,
then he went back to India, and then he came to wherever, Northolt or somewhere in West London. If you'd said to him at any stage, I'll tell you who of this class is going to be a rock superstar. Where are you going? Where are you going, Bulsara? Everybody take one step forward. Not you, matey. It's clearly
sit yourself back down.
And he also had too many teeth, didn't he? In his mouth.
He did, yeah.
He had an overbite, didn't he?
Beyond an overbite. You know, but kind of, he's the most extraordinary case of flaunt it regardless of whether you've got it or not. You know, he acted as though he was Rock Hudson. It's just
it worked.
It worked.
The point is, it worked. When you look at him at Live Aid, particularly, you thought he looks fantastic.
And in no other sphere of entertainment, could you have possibly got away with it. Not in acting, not in, couldn't be a novelist, couldn't be. All he can be is a guy out front with Britain's second most loved group ever of all time.
Right? Yeah.
I think he is. That's my. I think Queen after the Beatles, Britain's most loved group. There, we've thrown in a bit of controversy as well. That people can argue about that if they want, but that's my theory. So I'm very pleased that I was able to come up with the solution.
Well, thank you. It's been troubling.
Bonehead Arthur's has paled into insignificance. He's back in the shadows. He's back in the cab driving. Where to, mate? Well, south of the river. No. I've got to go home for my tea.
Well, look, Avi, thanks for joining us for your birthday. When is the birthday? Have you had it?
It was a week ago yesterday. 27th February. Yeah.
Okay, well, look, if you're like teenagers, your birthday lasts for an entire season nowadays. You know, it goes over a couple of weekends at least.
Right.
You've got our permission to continue with the festivities.
Thanks
very much for joining us.
Very good.
And thanks for your support. Happy birthday.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.